Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation and having me here. I used to be a clinician and I translated into research, and my interests currently are motor learning, what I'll be talking about, and neuroscientific approaches, and that's why I'm also working closely with Dustin on some projects. But before I start, who of you is a physiotherapist? Can you raise your hand? Okay, nice. And who of you works with ACL patients? Okay, okay, all right. I try to make my presentation with more of a science, not so much using science, but having a taste of how you could apply this in your clinic tomorrow, if you would like. It's totally up to you, of course, if you want to do it or not. And to kick off, if it works, my button doesn't work. Yeah, I had that one hooked on. I can try. Okay. Can you count how many times you see the letter F in this sentence? How many times you see the letter F? And I give you a little time for the translation. Uh-oh. Do I need to switch the... Okay, can I keep it? Okay. Okay. Which one is forward?
Oh, down, up, and
this is up?
Yeah.
Okay. So who found 3, 4, 5, 6? So it were 6. But Ali, what does this have to do with rehabilitation? Well, think about it. Maybe, like it did now, it didn't work so well how I instructed the question. Maybe my English was not so good. Maybe the translation was not correct. Or perhaps you thought, what a stupid question. This is such a boring exercise if it was applied to your patient. So think about what you can do as a clinician, as a physiotherapist, to make your rehabilitation enticing, challenging for your patient. If you always provide boring and standardized exercises, what can your patient learn? Or perhaps you were not sure, and somebody next to you raised by 4, you thought, well, let's also do that because I'm not sure, so I do 4. So we also need to realize that movement always takes place in a social, cultural environment. When you observe your patient, you observe the movement of your patient. If I walk here and I see all you guys observing me, my movement is affected because of that. Yeah, I'm not walking normally now. So think about these 3 items, please. And, oh, that's up. I need to go this way, sorry. So that's your 6 Fs. And now we go to the next one, like more the overview of my presentation. So what is motor learning? Do we really need it? And aren't we already doing it? Sure we do. But I would like you to think back, and Dustin already touched on a little bit. Describe for yourself in a few sentences how you learned to ride a bicycle. How did you do that? And try to explain it to me how you actually do it. Put some words to it. You'll probably find it quite difficult. Because in reality, it's something like this, right? You just hop on that thing, you get a helmet on, you have a little training bike, small wheels, training wheels, and your mommy or daddy are holding on to you. And you just practiced, just like Dustin said. And you made mistakes, sure, you fell on your face. Yeah, and it hurts, sure. It's part of the game. Yeah? But that's not what we do in rehab. Because I think in rehab, we're doing something like this. So with all good intentions, we provide a lot of instructions and feedback. So those are not the same. Instruction is not the same as feedback. What we give a lot. And just to give you an idea, in gait training, physiotherapists provide instructions every 14 seconds. And I would advise you, if you want to improve learning, it's sometimes better to be quiet. Let it happen. Let your patient practice like you learned how to ride a bicycle. Yeah? Give it time. So then what can we do? Well, we need to practice, obviously. But how do we do that? What's the environment? And what kind of instructions are we giving? Because that will be my main topic of today. There are many principles of motor learning you could use, but I would touch back on the attentional focus. I will talk about contextual interference, so the amount of variability you give, and something about a constraint-led approach. And I will use some examples to show you. So first about the attentional focus. And Dustin already explained it, and this is what, if we believe the literature, 95% of us do. We provide internal focus instructions, which means you direct your attentions to the body movements. So like bend your knee, keep your back straight, keep your knee over the toe, things like that. Yeah, that's what we commonly do. Conversely, with an external focus, you focus your attention on the outcome, on the goal of the movement. And in this case, I position a cone in front of the guy. I have a little foam ball attached to his tibial tuberosity, and I just say, touch the cone with the ball. And that's all I say. How he does it, that's up to him. Instructions afterwards, and that's feedback I can do to correct him. But how he does it, that's up to him. And that's what we need to understand. Motor learning is a self-organization process. If you think that we all learn the same, everyone is differently. So I will already tell you that there is no one golden principle how you can learn someone to obtain motor skills. It's very, very difficult. And that's what makes it challenging. So there is not a cookbook recipe for that. Examples like bending your knee, keeping your back straight, or in this case, he just has to touch the cones. What's the difference? When you use an external focus, you focus on the goal of the movement, and it entices basically the automatic motor control patterns that would normally take place. If you go into an internal focus, you rely more on conscious movement control. And that typically results in a stiffer motor pattern. What we also know is that when we go back to learning how to ride a bicycle, once you've learned that, you will always remember how to do it, even if you haven't ridden your bicycle for 10 years. You help on it, it takes a little bit, and then you can ride your bicycle again. That's typical for external focus and implicit learning. Internal focus instructions, they do work as long as you maintain it. So that's what we see in the ACL injury prevention programs. They do work, but you have to keep doing it. But from a motor learning perspective, actually learning does not take place because you have to continuously maintain it. Yeah? So we've done a review on that, and if you want to have more long-lasting effects, it would be something to consider using external focus instructions compared to internal focus instructions. Here, as you can see the examples. And if you want, I can send you my handouts also to the organization so you can always read the slides later on at home at your own convenience. So how can we apply this to rehabilitation? Well, why did I dive into this motor learning domain? Well, for a very obvious reason. I was not happy with the outcome of our rehab and the studies we published on that. I think we're doing in our clinic, and I will only talk about my own clinic, I don't think we did a good job. Because this is a measurement taken 6 months after an ACL reconstruction. So patients come in 3 times a week, and this is what you see after 6 months. Look at the initial contact on the right side. That's the uninjured side. On the left side, you see the injured knee. So what are you going to tell your patient now? If this would be a criterion, of course. But what would you tell a patient now? You would have to do a couple of more extra months of rehab because we're not quite happy yet. If this happens already at 6 months, I don't think our results are that good. And we see, and Edna, you talked about it also, and you know, a lot of these biomechanical deficits that we see, they can last up to 2 years. So what are we going to tell our patients? You need to do rehab for 2 years? No, I think we need to look at our rehabilitation more critically. I think we have a lot of potential there that we need to utilize. Look at the guy. He's getting an internal focus instruction, and he's getting an external focus instruction. And look at the difference. On the left, it was an internal. On the right side, it was an external focus instruction. And I'm not saying that one is good and one's bad, but I want to clearly point out there's a difference. And it's up to you which one you want to use. But there is a difference. So, and the difference is just using 2 different words. 2 different words have this effect. So the power of your language is very, very, very underestimated. So what you tell your patient, how you tell it, has this effect. This is what we found in ACL patients 6 months after reconstruction, and we provided them again an internal focus instruction and an external focus instruction. Look at knee flexion at initial contact, and look at peak knee flexion. But what you can remember from this slide, by just using 2 words difference, you can give your patients 10 degrees more knee flexion without any changes in the rehabilitation. By just changing 2 words, you gain 10 degrees of knee flexion. So I think it's easy to use, but it's up to you, of course, if you want to do it. It's up to you. What about performance? Well, oftentimes those limb symmetry indexes are used, and I showed you my slide. Almost all our patients passed that limb symmetry index as a criterion, yet their knee flexion was completely different from the involved to the uninvolved side. So we would also argue, don't only use the limb symmetry index, but also look at the absolute data and compare that to healthy normative data. So in other words, we also believe that there is an area that needs also improvement, and that's the performance part. How do our patients perform when they are cleared to return to sports? By changing again a few words, you can gain extra performance on, in this case, distance. So, and this would almost equal the 15% that we would use as a criterion, right? By just changing a few words. But in this case, added performance. Yeah? Oh, sorry, I pushed the wrong button. Sorry. So we heard that rehab takes a long time. So we're dealing with motivation, right? And we also heard about fear of injury. So is that something that's related to the patient? Or is that also something that's related to the environment that we create? So what about that? So how you structure your exercises is usually done in a so-called blocked training. And by blocked, I mean you first practice one skill, and when you're happy as a physio, then the patient may do the next skill, and then the next skill, etc., etc. So it's like Lego bricks. But we know that creating some variability improves learning. If you always do the same thing over and over again, yeah, you get good at what you've been practicing. But how good does that skill transfer over to something else? If you're always practicing lunges in a perfectly straightforward direction, yes, you are the world championship in forward lunges. But the moment you go back on the field, totally different environment. Yeah, so think about also the representative design. So what are you training? Does that relate what the patient is doing later on the field? And there are many different ways how you can create variability in your training. Too much is certainly not good, not too soon. So don't do this at 2 weeks, but you can do this after 6 weeks approximately. And you can do within skill. So you have, for instance, I will show an example on balance training. You can do some variation, but you can also do different variations of different exercises and mixing them up. And for example, this is how it looks, and I hope you can see it. But with the common practice, you have her practice A's, 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 and then when you're happy, okay, then she can go to the B's, the B's, the B's, and then in the third week she can go to the C's. What I'm doing, I'm mixing it up. And what does that do? Well, it creates variability. So it could help motivation, because we know that variable practice improves motivation of our patients. The second benefit is that you don't allow a lot of time for the patient to adapt, because the next exercise already is coming. So you're always confronting the patient with a new situation. What does it do? It activates your brain, because you have to find a solution for the problem I'm confronting the patient with. If I have her do the same exercise all over again, I notice that I was standing there next to the patient and they were talking to me. So is the exercise still a challenge? No. So what learning takes place? Nothing. Yeah? And another aspect, what we are doing is we allow, after a certain time with certain patients, so certainly not all, some self-control. Because typically what we did is that we as therapists decide what the patient does. Because we feel we know how the patient learns. Well, we know from many neuroscientific studies, if you allow self-control, that the brain is more active and the brain is learning quicker and better. So in this example, you see 9 exercises, and what I tell my patients, so the next time you come back, you can pick your 3 exercises that you want to do today, instead of me telling him, this is what you do. I allow them to pick 3 exercises. But like I said, you can't do this with all patients. Yeah? But what I do see, if I tell them, pick the 3 exercises, and imagine they were exercising in an incremental difficulty order, that I can see if someone is always picking the easy exercises. Then I can start talking to my patient, hey, I noticed in the last week, you always pick the easy ones. Why is that? Well, I'm a little bit afraid to do the more difficult ones. Maybe there's where your fear of re-injury is already being identified. And not only at HOP testing at 6 or 9 months. On the field, just some examples. We have to understand that when you move, it's always an interaction between the task, you as the athlete, and your environment. With the perception-action coupling, are we using that in rehabilitation? Usually very controlled, standardized exercises. Totally different than on the field. So we came up with a model, that's something that we're working on, will be published. You have your task, that could be running, could be sprinting. Then you have the load, and that's not only the physical load, but like Dustin pointed out, also the cognitive load. We have to add the cognitive load in our rehab sessions. And then we have the environment. Are we doing it in a clinic? Are you doing it on a football pitch? Are you doing it on a basketball court? And we can manipulate on those, and we can see what the outcome is, what the influence is on the individual athlete. And they are completely individual. There's no group semantics that you can identify there. I'll show you some examples. So here he has to watch a screen, and it depicts a square that he has to respond to on the field. So it's not only a motor task, but it's also a cognitive task. You can measure here, of course, speed. You could also measure biomechanics if you would like. And this would be something that you can apply in your clinic, so you don't have to spend 40,000 euros, but you can simulate this in your own clinic with 10 euros. Huh? But the concept, that's what is important. Here, what we did, we tested young football players, and we tested them under different conditions, and we had them wear stroboscopic glasses, and we tested the same without stroboscopic glasses. We had them in an accent suit, so we looked at kinematics, and we tested their performance, how fast were they, and we looked at their accuracy. So in this case, he had to respond to those cones on the floor. So different elements, both on the physical side and on the neurocognitive side. And you can see We tested 20 players, and there were 20 totally different responses. So that's interesting to see. Don't always look at mean values of the total group, but look how your individual athlete is scoring. It's quite different than the group value. Lastly, and Dustin already put that ahead, if you have an injury like that, please don't forget that it's a mind game and that we need to include the mind as well. And testing the brain, training the brain, and it's not only a musculoskeletal injury. There's a human being attached to that knee. Don't forget that. Thank you for your attention.